No, I'm not using her stuff.
It's not hers. I used it when I was teacher.
All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out. Today is October the 6th. It is roughly about 10 after 1. And I am going to go ahead and begin or open our charter school, the Charter Schools and Alternative Programs Board Committee meeting. Today, we've got a few things. We're going to hear from a few people. We're going to share a few things. And at the end of the day, we're going to walk out of here some happy people. I promise. Because we should just be happy. Ms. Corinne's going to do the welcome. And then Amy is going to do the land acknowledgement, and then we'll pick up the agenda after we go from there. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Corinne so that she can welcome us all here.
Thank you, Director Green. Welcome. So I just want to reiterate what Director Green just shared, that we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll go over our agenda, which includes the charter school application update. We have a funding update, and then we have both a charter school spotlight and a contracted alternative school spotlight. So we'll get to hear from some school leaders today. Today we have Portland Arthur Academy in the house and Portland Youth Builders that we'll hear from. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll have public comment. So that's our day.
Thank you. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 different tribal nations, including the descendants of the local nations of the Chinook, Kathlamet, Multnomah, Kalapuya, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Molalla, and Tualatin. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization and genocide on all of our students, and make visible the multitude of Native families in many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. In addition to acknowledging the land and those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak the truth into spaces so that we can all begin to heal. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always good to start in a good way. So the first item of business is going to be really short and sweet. It's just a very brief update on our charter school application. So I'm going to invite Tara O'Neill to come up and join me. As we shared last month, we received one new charter school application this year. And so as statute outlines our process, we took the time to review that, and it was the application, and it was found to be incomplete. And so we shared that information back with the applicant. And then, Tara, do you want to kind of share current state?
Sure. The information shared back to the applicant then tells them which portions we found incomplete and why. And then they're given 30 days to resubmit a second time with their application. So they did, in fact, resubmit within their 30-day window. And currently, we are looking at the application now, the second submission for completeness. So we had 30 days, so we'll have that completed for them and information back by October 13th.
Can you tell us who that applicant is, or anything about their pedagogy or plan?
So the application is for a K-8 Montessori school with looking ahead to also including a preschool portion to that. And then the next screen will talk about what happens from here.
Yep.
So if the resubmitted application is found to be complete, then we move to the evaluation phase. So a PPS team will evaluate the content of the application as well as the capacity of the applicant. So that's looking at both content, pedagogy, as well as financial and organizational aspects. And then the PPS board committee, by statute, will hold a public hearing within 60 days of the statement of completeness. And then within 30 days of that public hearing, the full board will need to hold a vote on approval or denial of the application. If instead it is found incomplete a second time, then the application will be denied. the full PPS board will hold a vote on the decision to deny that application based on incompleteness. And the applicant may reapply the next time we take applications, which will be next year. There is also an appeal process to the state that they may choose to follow at that time.
And so just to kind of go back, we, I don't know if we explicitly said, but so by October 13th, we'll make the determination of completeness, and then we'll share that with senior leadership, and then the board will be so the board committee will be informed after that time. So that's the next step as far as our communication to the board. All right. And then next we have the funding update. So I'll invite our Chief Financial Officer, Noberto, to come join.
Good afternoon. That was quick.
Yeah, short and sweet.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, friend.
So for today, I wanted to bring back a follow-up from our conversation that we had at our last meeting, and really present some information and just consideration as the committee considers a recommendation on what to do next. And so as part of that, prepared a deck, a few slides to just talk through and then invite for discussion. And so really the objective here is, per the last meeting, to identify funding recommendations in order to consider an increase for funding to community-based organizations. And so really the goal of this is to focus less on the why or any specific dollar amounts, but just kind of approach it from like policy and context towards building or adding context to build understanding towards a decision or a recommendation. And so from student investment account prior year context, in anticipation of the 2021 school year, the original amount that was allocated for the student investment account was close to $40 million. And so back then, CBOs were allocated, the plan allocation was close to about $940,000. And so the board, this information was shared with the board back in February 2020, and the table here outlines what those allocations look like based on the funding mechanism and allocation that was prepared back in 2020. And then as time progressed, COVID became part of our daily dialogue, unfortunately. And so with the COVID-19 pandemic, it impacted tax revenues at the state level and therefore impacted the overall SIA allocation for all districts. And so our share was then reduced by almost 2/3 to approximately 12 million. So we're budgeting with about 40 million. Bad news comes along, we're down to, the state tells us it's going to be closer to 12 million. And so back at during the budget amendment in September 2020, this information was shared with the board. And then subsequently, there were the adjustments were done in proportion to the new funding amount. And here's another table, revised totals based on the 12 million in student investment account. Were then adjusted accordingly based on overall allocation amount, based on student enrollment, and essentially following through the state's formula for Admw. And then current year, so kind of fast forward into current year, in March 2021, we reaffirmed the reductions, but also projecting an increase as we were making progress through the year with the state corporate tax collections. And so the current year plan was developed with an SIA allocation of about $32 million. And so the SIA budget was submitted to the Oregon Department of Education that incorporated the CBO allocation of about $705,000, which is based on the $32 million. And so throughout this process with the student investment account, fairly new funding stream that the state put in place about 2 years ago, funding for our CBOs and the SIA plans have been consistently based on ADMW, the average daily membership that's weighted along with based on the total SIA calculation, as seen in the proportional fluctuations from the previous tables. And so the additional context is that,
For 1
oh,
second.
yep,
please.
sure thing.
So the 271 or 272 was what was allocated. So the 12 million was where we ended up. That was not a budget projection. That was actual. So what we are projecting, our proposed allocation for this fiscal year and this school year is $500,000 more, más o menos, almost $500,000 more between
Between,
all of our CBOs.
correct,
Okay.
correct. And,
Yes.
and a little caveat there, we started the year with 32 million. The state did provide an update, and it's closer to 36 million. So there is a small relatively speaking, but there is an uptick of about $4.9 million.
And when those adjustments take place in the year, like when do we actually make those budget decisions? I mean, when we see a revenue shift like that from this account, when do we actually revise our commitment, not just our projection?
So the commitment is injected as part of the formula. So there is, if we're using Admw, so if it's 32 million and now it's 36 million, those dollar amounts will be injected as part of our stated mechanism for distributing. So based on if it's happening monthly or it's happening every quarter, like SIA gets funded, I believe, it's like 3 times a year. So we'll then just process that funding accordingly. But it's because we're using a set formula, it's essentially default that we would then pass through those funds as soon as whatever our contracted mechanism states that we do it.
Because it's by student, so it's, okay,
Correct, yeah. And weighted student, yeah.
right?
I'll move on to the next slide, but please feel free to stop me and
Sorry, Herman.
yeah, and really just additional context regarding the student investment account. And it was a historic moment for Oregon and schools across the state, and the approach that we took with figuring out how to invest this new funding stream. There was a huge community engagement effort, and along with that, based on guidelines from ODE, instructional best practices, and the community feedback, the district created essentially a list of investments and prioritized them, Tier 1, Tier 2. So Tier 1 investments would immediately be funded, while Tier 2, as funding became available or depending on the sequencing of time, would then be funded. And it's really just kind of some additional context as we think about the variety of funding opportunities and investments. And this information is on our website. And the other note here is that funding did increase, as I mentioned earlier, by about 4.9 million. So we did start the year budgeting with 32 million back in June, and now we're closer to 36 million. And so the other item for consideration is just like the concept of Admw, and we start thinking about how that plays a role in the equitable funding here. And just to level set for context, some folks may be really familiar with Admw, others isn't. There's a link here that takes it to the state calculation of how it's done and the consideration, but it is a measurement of need associated with students to help determine several funding streams, and so it plays a critical role when we think about how SIA is funded and distributed to our schools. And so whether it's funding that comes from the state to our district, we then leverage the same mechanism to then distribute it to our charter partners, CBO partners, and then figuring out what proportional share stays with the district as well. And so then if we consider shifting away from Admw or leveraging another mechanism, it would just be a recommendation to just carefully assess what that could look like as we think about parity within our existing programs. And as an example, With
Wait, can you go back one second? I
Yes.
didn't read that last.
Oh, sure thing.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and so like thinking about why we use ADMW or why we wouldn't use ADMW would just require some additional analysis to then figure out these type of implications that are as displayed on this slide here. Using the CBO proposal that was submitted back in December. And that was December 2019, and then there were subsequent conversations since then. It's approximately $2,500 per slot. And that request would result in an additional $1,900 after the already allocated of about $600 per slot. So based on the current mechanism, we've already allocated about $614 per student. And that includes the increase with the 4.9 million as well. We would then be left with a difference of about $1,900. So below in that table, there are some examples of the funding differences that would result if PPS implemented the CBO proposal. So for comparison reasons, the measure we're using here for comparative purposes is the ADMW, which goes back to how weight is, or the student enrollment and how the state calculates need based on a student's demographics. And so from a comparative purposes, this then starts pointing out some of the differences in funding that would happen with a variety of different program types. And Cairo's PDX is not on the table here. They opted to receive their funding straight from the state, but just for comparative purposes, their ADMW, I believe, is close to approximately 217, and their SI allocation would be approximately 130,000. And the other consideration is, it's just important to remember, as much as funding would change depending on the number of students or the student demographics, it's also dependent on state school funding revenue. So we experienced that over the past 2 years. We went from an estimated 40 million to, guess what? You now have 12 million. And so just like that, it's also important to remember that it's not a guaranteed funding source.
So, I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys are on top of this, but I don't understand exactly what is represented by those last two columns. If you could just explain what you're showing there, 'cause that's
so it essentially is the SIA funding column represents the total amount of SIA funding that each program would receive. So when we take a look at the
based on the proposal that the CBO partners have brought to
Correct.
us, that's what's represented by the third column.
1, 2, 3, or 4, the SIA funding column.
Yeah,
Yes.
the fourth column.
Yes.
And then the last column is what that amount would be just through the SIA ADMW weighted formula that we use for all the rest of our allocations. So
yeah,
that's showing the delta there.
It's essentially taking the SIA funding. So we look at the very first row as an example, Naya, take $149,000, which would be what they would receive at essentially $2,500 per slot. We would divide 149,940 by 75. We would then get the 1,999. And so from the SIA funding on a per student, per ADM, weighted ADM, those would be the numbers. So when we start thinking about the intentionality behind ADM is to measure need, student need, we start seeing some fairly large funding differences in how, if we're approaching need based on ADMW, we start seeing some of those differences in funding when some of the differences in ADMW may not vary as much.
So this is all really informative and complex, and I just want to sort of encapsulate how I understand things and where we are, and get some resonance with that. So basically what I feel like has happened is when we set out our budget allocation, there was a miscommunication around a specific line item, and the CBOs interpreted that as they were receiving 2.3 million, somewhere around there. And that really that was a line item that had MPGG and some other things underneath it. And I didn't do my due diligence. And when the CBO said, hey, we're getting all this extra money, this is awesome, thank you, I was just like, sweet. Because, budget book is big, and I take the personal responsibility that I didn't dive deeply there. I was just like, okay, the CBOs are happy. I believe in the CBOs. This is awesome. And then when it was clarified that 2.3 million actually contained more than the CBOs, and it was less than they had expected, there were these feelings of betrayal, that there were this miscommunication, that there was this power differential. And now we have this proposal from the CBOs to say, okay, we thought you all had told us this one thing, and we had sort of counted on that. Where do we go from here? And I think the question then for the district is, as we try to repair that feeling of betrayal, even though the district, I think, I don't believe the district did a bait and switch on the CBOs. I think it really was a miscommunication. That may not be everybody's feeling, but having talked to a lot of people, that's what I feel happened. So how do we repair this sense of, even if it wasn't true, even if nobody did anything wrong, how do we repair this sense of betrayal? So we've looked at, if we were to use our SIA funds and allocate the 1.6 to the CBOs, what would be the equity cost to other places, and how would that impact other students? And so I think that's kind of my understanding of what we're wrestling with. Is I think everybody up here at the dais, and I think a lot of people in the district, support the CBOs and understand that they do incredible work, especially with students that our comprehensive high schools in particular have not been able to serve. And so I think I have a vested interest in wanting to support the CBOs and help them to be whole. And yet, what does that mean when we're looking at how do we allocate the funds equitably when we're looking at other students? And so what are the other equity costs? But I think the bigger question is, how do we deal with trust, institutional racism, and the dynamics of race in this room, right? As we're looking at what has happened, how do we move forward in ways that disrupt our white supremacy culture? And I don't know what those answers are, but I just feel like this is a really complicated financial situation, and there may be some right answers financially, and yet I think there's a deeper, for me, even if we give the CBOs the 1.6 million, there's still this sense of betrayal and breaking of trust. And how do we as a district communicate better in the future and make sure that we're really, really clear with our partners? Because I feel like damage has been done no matter what we do next. And obviously, I'm not personally in support of giving the CBOs the 1.6 million out of the additional SIA funding because of how that will impact other students of color and other students in need in our district. And so it's this very it's bigger than the money. I know the money is super important, but how we relate to our CBOs and especially to our programs that serve our historically underserved students, we've got to do better. And I know there was a lot going on when all this happened and the district was shifting. And yet I think it's about this fundamental lack of trust in PPS. And I think you're really trying, Alberto, to Chief Delegadio, to be really clear and to be transparent. And I so appreciate that. And I don't know what to do with all these huge questions that we're wrestling with around equity and fairness and communication and relationship. And that's kind of where I am in this moment. I don't know how y'all are feeling about all of this.
I think where I said, and I believe I said it when we met, when we talked. I think that this could be, for me, I think this is easy, in that if it's simply a miscommunication, I said it in a meeting, I'll say it here openly. If it's simply a miscommunication and, we typed the wrong thing, similar to if you go to Fred Meyer and they got, one price, one thing, but we all know that price is not that, but yet I'm going to take it up there and I'm going to take a picture of it, and then I'm going to say, no, but it says that, and so therefore you're going to have to honor it. I know that I'm taking advantage of a system, even though I know that that's not the case. I never agree with that. I don't do it personally. And so if that's what this is, then I will be the first person to go back to the CBOs and everybody else and say, I'm not going to give you some money simply because we listed something wrong. You knew that it was wrong. I knew that it was wrong. This is what it is. However, with that being said, if we know that, let's say we put this on the paper, because you gave me a big long list, and there was a lot of stuff in there, Roberto. It was. And on that piece of paper, and for that same line item for the previous year, right? If the same line item for that previous year, 1284, I believe, is the number, the number for alternative schools. And so if that same line item says $1 million for the previous year, and then we divvied it all out, and everybody got what they got, and everybody was happy with it last year, and then this year, the line item comes back, same line item, and it says $2 million, and we divvied it all out, and then everybody's not happy, then it's easy. Let's go back to the first year. If the first year, when we did it, it was 10 schools, and 10 schools got divvied out that $1 million, and then everybody was happy, then great. And when we come back this second year, are they making an assumption based on they thought it was going to be the same 10 schools from last year, or did we add 10 more schools this year because we wanted to put some money in some other people and some other projects and some other things? And now they're upset because they looked at the same number from last year and say, wait a minute, I got $1 million last year. On the paper, it said $1 million. I don't care what, it was supposed to go to, but it said $1 million. We knew that it was going to go out to these 10 companies or these 10 CBOs or whatever. We did our math. It all lined up. We got what we wanted, and everybody was happy. This year, we did the same math based on the same calculation that we did it for last year, and now all of a sudden it's different. And when I come back to you, you're saying that, oh, that's because it's not actually 10, it's actually 20. Well, if it wasn't 20 last year, then it shouldn't be 20 this year. That's how I'm looking at it. So if we can bring the papers back, give it to the CBOs and be like, look, this is where it was at last year. This is where it was at this year. It's the exact same mechanism because formulas don't lie. What lies is when you change the formula. And so the formulas didn't lie. This is what it is. And then they got to eat it. They got to take that one on the cheek and we move on to the next thing. But if we're wrong, then we got to take it on the cheek and we got to move to the next thing. And so that's why I say for me, this is easy, because not that it's like, it's easy. It's just, this is easy to figure out. And what's right is right and it don't wrong nobody. That's how I look at it. So that's my thought on that.
I just want to follow up on one little thread there. At the end is that I don't think it's about whether or not the formula changed, but I think it was the representation of the formula which created the misunderstanding. And for me, this is really important slide, because when we met the last time, what I asked for was to see the what the difference in the per student spending would be, and then also ideally to be able to compare it to some of our other schools, like our own in-house alternative schools, our comprehensive schools. I meant to bring my beloved volume 2 budget book that you can flip to every single school and see the per student allocation, even though there's some apples and oranges issues there. Because what I care about, well, first of all, when we talk about repairing past wrongs, I don't want to miss the opportunity to say that, like, I feel like we've been on that journey for the last 2 or 3 years with our charter and alternative schools, and we've made a huge amount of progress. And I've said this before, so I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's progress that needed to be made, because there is a history of these schools not being treated equitably in our system. And I think we have evolved to come to a place where there are fewer and fewer biases about the kind of setting that our students are served in, and much more of a focus on who are these students and what are their needs. It doesn't matter if they're in a comprehensive school or a charter school or a community-based alternative school. It's all about who are these kids and what do they need, and how do we as a system make sure that we're treating them equitably and giving them access to the same resources. And I do think that we've made a ton of progress on that. But that said, regardless of like the origin of misunderstanding or anything here, for me, what's most important is to be able to look at how we're resourcing, these schools relative to all of our students in all different settings. And that means using our equity lens too, because we don't believe that we don't believe that everyone's equal or everyone starts at the same place. I don't mean to give that impression. And our whole budget is based on differentiating students by need. It's, why we used to have a budget that resourced schools almost entirely just on enrollment, that whoever walks through the door, this is how much you give, other than, certain categories that were weighted by the state. We don't really do that anymore. Or we do it less and less, and hopefully we continue to evolve in that way too. We look at what is the student population and how do we provide resources for students that historically have been underserved. So for me in this conversation, what's most important is to look at this issue in the context of how are we treating our students in other settings, and do we end up with relatively some kind of parity there. That said, I also want to acknowledge that, we do have additional ways that we support our students in these community settings, because these are high need students. These are some of our highest need students. So it's not about looking to save any money here in terms of how we resource these schools and these students, because we know that they deserve the best. They deserve as much and more as students in every other setting in our district. So we're hoping that your next slide, what you just got here from each of us is our strongly held opinions that arrive at no conclusion. So we're hoping that your next slide helps us move this issue along.
It really is about a little bit of what all of y'all just talked about, and thinking about from a policy perspective, what are some of the considerations to make and trade-offs there to assess. And in thinking about the volume 2 budget book and thinking about some of the conversations we've had recently, is trying to get to an apples to apples comparison. And really the focus of this conversation, these slides have been on SIA. We're just thinking about how do we do SIA. We have a formula. The district went through an amazing process to engage the community, put together a plan, the state put together a funding mechanism. And so then how do we continue to leverage that and thinking about SIA? And so really the recommendations are for the committee to consider, as if they decide to make a recommendation to the board and the superintendent, as we think about if SIA funding would be, if it was to increase, excuse me, English is not my first language, if SIA funding's increase to CBOs, continue using only SIA funding, so just back to just thinking about SIA funding, and if we were to consider any other sort of funding, if there were to be any other consideration, is really back to the point that was just made by Director Constein, is thinking about the equitable parity between programs and just the time and additional thoughtful consideration to really flesh that conversation out. And if funding were to increase, it really is a one-time, it would be a one-time increase, and continue using Admw as we think about the best mechanism we have right now, and really to mitigate funding discrepancies between programs, or at least until we have further rationale to better calibrate or not, and being explicit about the not part, and assessing how we fund programs with similar needs. And really, like the other one is from more of a technical perspective, and just any sort of budget adjustments should just follow the best practice and have the superintendent submit a supplemental budget to the board with proposed changes, not just SIA, but just overall funding strategy. As the year starts off, we know things change, and kind of as we make that progress. And the last thing is just to reiterate, SIA revenues fluctuate, and that's just a given. It's not guaranteed funding, and so we've been pegged to what happens at the state level that then dictates the funding that comes our end based on the other variable, which is then student enrollment and the demographics of our students. So this concludes the presentation here, and we've been discussing, but really just see if there are any other questions or discussion.
Yes. Did you get a chance to look into, and I'm glad you hit the point of this is really relegated to just the SIA funding. And so we've been spending a lot of time on this because it's the SIA funding. But I believe if you'll recall in our last meeting, the other issues, I believe it was actually slide 22 of the other presentation, where we had a comparison that we were going to look into, and I was hoping that was actually going to be a part of this, so that we can talk about that for the current budgeted numbers. Do you recall that one?
I do, yeah, and again, I did not bring that here solely to stick to SIA funding, but to go back to that conversation, it was about the information on volume 2 that shows like the breakdown per schools. And so
not the, well, I don't know about when we say volume 2, I'm just looking at the.
Well, and to your point, Dr. Rain, I took that information and put it on that
Gotcha,
slide.
gotcha.
Yeah. So it's the same information. So for public's reference, it's information that we have in our volume 2. I pulled it out, put it on a slide that I worked with you and the committee to just kind of get a sense of like starting to compare like what we're talking about. And so we started looking at, for example, Roosevelt. We started Alliance as an example, or MLC, and just thinking about like what are then the funding differences that happen within those schools. And so, for example, like Alliance is one that shows that it's about $25,000 per student. And so that's something that we're working to further understand its enrollment, but then simultaneously, it's also a program that's targeted for additional federal dollars through, I don't recall if it's CSI or a TSI school.
Right, and I think that's what
CSI.
we were trying to figure out, because when I looked at the slide, I was like, this is what everybody should be talking about. Like, you know what I'm saying? SIA is cool because that's go come and that's go.
Right.
You know, it's good to talk about that. But when you look at this one specifically, because it was really just the alternative schools, you had Rosemary Anderson at 351 and then at a funding per student of 12,786. And then you had the Alliance at 198 with the funding of 25,154. And I'm thinking in my mind, skip SIA. Keep all the SIA money, play with it, do what you want to. Just treat me like the Alliance. So if I'm anybody, that's what I want to be treated like. And so that's what I was hoping that we will be able to get clarity on.
And that's part of being able to spend more time to unpack, because there are some additional questions we need to understand with respect to enrollment and the sequencing and timing of enrollment. So for example, towards the latter part of the year, we see an enrollment increase at Alliance. And did we use the latter part of enrollment, or do we use the front end of enrollment? And so that's part of just being fully transparent. Some of the clarifications we need to work through to make sure we get to comparing apples to apples.
I have real questions about the accuracy of that Alliance number, and if you compare
it's an outlier.
these
stands
numbers to
out.
like Roosevelt or other places, something's not quite right
Right.
there.
The reason I didn't choose Roosevelt, and Norberto, I know that you're working. I'm all about transparency, and I thought that I was going to see that. I didn't see it. And I know that you're working on it, and I got every confidence that you're going to do everything that we talked about doing. The only reason I didn't really think about Roosevelt and the other ones is because Roosevelt is a traditional public comprehensive school, as where the Alliance and Rosemary Anderson, those are specifically what we're saying is our alternative schools. So they have been categorized as something different. You know what I mean? And so that's why I was looking at it, because and that's the only reason I didn't put them two together.
And part of the equation too is I know CBOs also do private fundraising and have other nonprofit support. So that, I mean, when we're looking at this, how do we weigh all that? I feel like there's two fundamental questions. One is, what are we going to do right now about the 1.6 delta that we're kind of
Yeah.
wrestling with. And the other is, what do we do long term about issues like this of saying, how do we equitably and justly fund our alternative programs, all of them? And what does that look like? And how do we, it's one of those things, numbers can be tools for transparency, but they also can be like, okay, is this number at Alliance the entire enrollment, or is it the early enrollment and we know it's going to grow? When we compare to Rosemary Anderson, how much do we give? What are they getting from the community in a way that's like, how do we really truthfully look at that to make sure that Rosemary Anderson is getting equitably funded? And I think that that's part of our role as a charter. But I think that's a bigger question as we look into the budget for next year. The question before us now is, this 1.6 delta. And I feel like there was a miscommunication, and there's this sense of like, how do we make it right? And so I would like to, how do we solve problems, right? You said you're a problem solver. That's why I came on the school board too, is like, what if we gave $800,000 to our CBOs, not the full amount, but honoring that there was a miscommunication and there was some struggle here. So their numbers from the SIA would be, ADMW would be elevated this year, but it would be a step toward sort of saying, this was a breakdown. We understand that. We want to do something to like bring some healing and wholeness here. This is a one-time change. In the future, it'll go back to the formula of this line item divided by 20. Like, is that a middle path we can take to make something a little bit right and not put us too far out of whack with our other equity dollars?
My question would be, where would that come from, and what would be the impacts, and to whom?
So I would say that $800,000 would come out of the additional SIA funding we're getting beyond what we had, the 4.9, and the impact would be on our other programs and on our historically underserved students, the tier 2. So there is a cost.
Tier 1. So
it would be tier 1.
Some of our other partners or programs would, by default, just get less, because that pot of 4.9 has been shrunk, and so it's now 4.9 minus X. Yeah, right. Exactly. And so then there's that consideration as well.
So that's what I would like to see us do. I mean, I know we as staff can't direct staff, but that, I feel like, it doesn't make anybody happy, but it's a compromise. So that's what I'd like to see us look at doing. But I'm one person on the board, and so therefore have no power. Board members are only effective in the collective.
I want to go back to what you were saying, Director Green, about, the whole process and all the other pots of resources and all that. I would love for this committee this year, now that we're at the very beginning of our broader budget process, to really make a commitment to looking at financially how we resource our charter and alternative programs across the board and relative to everything else, so that we're prepared going into the budget process, so that each of us can stand up and say, I think it's equitable, I think it's fair, I think it's where it should be, or advocate for, whatever changes we think there need to be made. And that's something that will take a little doing. So if we can make a commitment at each of our meetings to kind of move that conversation along, I think that would be a good use of our time.
And Amy, I know you were really passionate about this delta last meeting, the 1.6. Where are you on, what do you think we should do now in that? Because you were the one raising that question.
Did this just turn into a talk show? No, so I do want to speak to that. So I think there's a lot of misunderstandings here, including my own. And I've done a lot of digging. I think we each have spent a lot of time with staff together and separately, or not together really, but separately. We haven't done it together.
For the
That's
record,
not just
because
covering
that
up.
would have been a quorum. We did it separately.
We did.
So that we could all be on the same page.
Staff gave us a lot of time.
And I think we also talked to our CBO partners too.
For sure, to really look back and say, okay, where was this larger number represented? How was it represented? And I think, to my mind, I haven't seen any place where it said just very explicitly that number only represented allocations to the CBOs. That said, there was a level of misunderstanding and confusion. I kind of like your compromise approach, especially since we are seeing some unexpected additional resources from better CAT revenues. I'm not 100% comfortable with that because, you know, we always like to, what's the expression? Underpromise and overdeliver, so that when we make those budget projections for the SIA funding for all of our programs, you know, they're by nature, or the state ones, they're by nature conservative. So we do find ourselves, you know, as the economy improves, in a position where we can redistribute, and there's a ton of need. I mean, the priorities associated with our strategic plan and for our highest need schools are like nothing that any one of us would feel good about under resourcing either, you know. So it's a difficult question, although this issue is complicated enough, and I don't want to overcomplicate it. But also in this conversation, I want us to raise another issue that is of concern to our CBOs, which has to do with their Admw allocations based on attendance. And I want to see what does that mean to them and how do we visit that. And I'm not trying to intentionally make the water more murky, but if we're talking about any kind of potential, you know,
Real
recompense or redistribution, like, we might need to get everything on the table. So that's where I am. I do appreciate your compromise. You know, I know that every single one of these organizations can use all that money and more in service to their incredible students, you know, every day of the week. So that's kind of where I am.
Are you waiting to see what I'm gonna say about where I am? I told y'all, just out of curiosity, I'm looking at the formula. I'm a principal guy, and so I'd like to see, before I make a decision on whether I'd say just go ahead and give them the money. Show me where it was wrong. Show me where it was wrong, and then let's go from there. There's something that we can do. I don't have no. The issue that I would have would just be around the principle of the thing. Right. It's not, you know what I'm saying, should we do something? Absolutely. Do I want to do something? Absolutely. But then that what? And then I got to figure out, if I do give this money out, or we do give this money out, then where is it coming from? Who else hurts? Because you just can't pull money out of thin air. And so, although this money came, I am also considerate to the strategic plan. Like, you know what I'm saying, based on where we're going and where we're trying to get, how are we going to use this money to help us get there? And then does that reduce us by so? And if so, by what? It doesn't mean that at the end of the day, I'm not going to say, well, let's do it anyway. It just simply means I need to count up the costs before I start building this house, because I don't want to start and then not be able to finish because I ran out of money or ran out of material. So I'd still like to see that piece that we talked about. I know that you're working on getting that. So, but I'm not a solid no.
I appreciate that. What is the impact, and who is the impact? Who does it impact? Who would it impact?
And at the end of the day, it's got to come back to the board. But also,
just to be clear, well, I mean, would be to the superintendent, and what is the superintendent's recommendation here?
Because he's got a plan.
Yeah.
That's why we pay him.
One thing I will add is, as we think about like further unpacking and getting some more information around the alliances of the world and like the conversation we had, I think it's as we go through that, there's also that consideration similar to like CBOs or charters who will fundraise or do other sort of opportunities to raise revenue. With some schools, there's items that are also outside of our control. For example, like that CSI or federal designations that automatically give them additional funding dollars. So it's like, well, if the federal government determines that this school is targeted for additional improvements and here's additional funding dollars, I would urge us to be to take that in, to be thoughtful around well, let's not penalize then them with another, so they therefore not penalize them with SIA or something else, like, oh, well, they're CSI TSI funding, so you shouldn't get SIA dollars or not. So I think it's like, as we just think about that balance in funding with some of these programs and our schools, like keeping that in mind as we work through that process. And I think that's part of like unpacking and getting as much additional information to build our understanding to then help shape the choices. Yeah. I don't have, unless there's other questions.
Not at this time. I do think that we'll probably be coming back to the table, especially around the issue that Amy just brought up about the budget allocation or their funding allocation based on attendance and whether or not that's rolling and what that's going to look. I don't know anything at this point about all of that. There's been some whispers in the wind, you know what I'm saying, and I'm looking to see where this conversation goes.
I mean, I think these are really important equity conversations as we look at how do we understand these things and what are the factors and how can we do better. Again, I think there's a short-term issue about the 1.6 delta, and then there's the long-term issue about what do we do for the next budget cycle and how do we make this more equitable. It sounds like we're gonna. I mean, what are our next? Are we just saying we're not going to give the CBOs any more money? Are we?
I didn't say
this
that.
year. I mean, what's our plan? What's our timeline going forward? What are we going to continue to think about?
It's not up to us sitting up here to decide.
Right, but we can recommend to the board action. So what's next is kind of what I'm asking.
All right. I think what we'll end up doing is making a recommendation that we consider, the board consider the two options. Either we do nothing or we give them the 800,000 or something like that. I mean, we can, but at the end of the day, the committee can make a recommendation to the board on how, and then the board is going to make a suggestion.
Or we can ask staff for more information, or we can, I mean, there's lots of things we could do. The question is just,
Let's
what is
get
it that
to
we
the bottom
want?
of the money. It should be, at the end of the day, how y'all frame it, how we call it. I don't know. Call it what you want to. At the end, I want to get to the bottom of the money, because if you get people eating, right? If everybody is eating and ain't nobody, you know what I'm saying, stomach growling, then it's easy for me to talk about the work that needs to be done. But as long as I can hear my stomach growling, and as long as, you know what I'm saying, I'm trying to figure out, am I robbing Peter to pay Paul just so I can keep doing this, then everybody suffers in the long run. So at the end of the day, the bottom line for me is whatever conversation we need to have, whether it be us as a three-team, three-leg unit, or it's us as a staff, or it's coming back, get to the bottom of the money so that they can stay focused on the kids. And then that's why I say it's simple, because this is money, and it's not my money.
And
So-
Director Green, I think part of what you're saying to get to the bottom of the money is I want to go back to your request to get more information on what the impact would be and
Yeah.
who would be impacted across our system. And then that feeds into hopefully our process in this committee for the rest of the year, like to just like start from the ground up to look at how we're resourcing all these schools, and does it align with our values and with our equity agenda as a whole district? And if it doesn't, how do we get things
Then we start making
back in
changes.
place?
It's simple. I think we overcomplicate stuff. All right, now, Berto,
Okay.
my guy. I love this guy.
Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, but I'll be around. Thank you. Nope, this is not my computer.
Yeah,
And-
don't steal things.
Yeah.
It's bad luck.
And you on camera.
He at least realized it wasn't his computer.
And I forget what's next on our agenda, but Karina, is there an opportunity in this meeting for us to learn more about the issue of attendance-based allocation that's causing particular concern to our CBOs right now? Or does staff have any more information to provide?
Is it going to be public discussion where that's going to come up?
So are you referencing enrollment and
Yes.
attendance codes?
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes.
referencing? So just briefly, I'll just share that, and So briefly, I'll just share that in one of the issues that across the state, but particularly in Portland, that we're really hearing and experiencing is some enrollment challenges with regard to students who are not attending, are engaged in other ways, but are not necessarily leaving their homes to attend school for either public safety reasons or public health reasons. And so there is conversation and questions with regard to alt ed and the alt ed leadership within Salem and the alt ed advisory committee around what is the opportunity and to expand that and what would that look like. So we are asking those questions from around the state, and we're asking those questions certainly from Portland Public around how can we do our best to take care of students that are disengaging or have particular challenges this particular year. So we'll learn more. We're asking those questions. We don't have any answers, but I was happy and pleased that it's not just solely a Portland issue. It's a statewide issue that folks are alt ed, private alternative schools, private and public alternative schools from around the state are asking.
So is this a issue that is impacting all of our schools? So like if Roosevelt's numbers are down, if Madison's numbers are down, then they get less money? As a state, we get less money? Or is this an issue as to where the alternative schools, if their numbers are down, they get less money, but if Roosevelt numbers are down, their numbers are fixed?
So I think it's both. But I think, and I do believe we have some leaders that are going to give some public comment, and so that might address, that might also speak to this. But with regard to contracted alternative schools, what we don't have is we don't have the on-ramp per se that districts do. So when we have lower enrollment, so I guess I would also say we can certainly have this as a topic. This wasn't a topic today, but we can certainly have this as a topic in the future. But with regard to how we fund contracted alternative schools, it's based on reimbursement for enrollment. And so as we are starting the year and some of our schools are having challenges with regard to students and enrollment, it has a more faster impact with regard to funding on our contracted schools. It has an impact to our district as well, but it's a larger budget process. And again,
No one heard
Right,
you.
I would
Your
add the
mic wasn't
economy
on.
of scale.
I said also because they're smaller.
Yeah, the economy
So-
of scale, I think, for both
Yes.
CBOs and charters as well. For the small independent schools, when you're enrollment based, that economy of scale makes a big difference.
So this is a reimbursement. So essentially, if their numbers are down, they're only going to bill us for 20 kids when normally they had 40. And now because of this, they're still out working with these kids in different ways and different facets. I'm just trying to make sure I understood what you're saying. They're still out working with these 40 kids in different facets, but only 20 of them are showing up to the billing. However, they can't bill us for whatever they're doing extracurricular. They can only bill us for the. Okay, so that's a problem, but I feel like it's easy. I'm an easy solution type guy. They can bill us for, so they got one bill, and I know this got to go to staff and everybody else, but so what if we come up with something where we're like, okay, you bill us for the 20 that you're working with in the school, and then you bill us another for what you're doing on the extracurricular, because we know that you got guys going out and gals going out in the field working with the other 20, and then you submit a total for 40 with an explanation on what you did with the other 20, and then we go pay you accordingly.
So
Remember, we're going to send you to Salem and straighten them out. Say, let's just try to figure out a little more common sense approach, because you're not wrong. You're onto something, but unfortunately,
I'm just
they make
thinking
things a lot more complex.
So I'd just like to say the way that we fund and the way that payment is provided to private alternative schools is outlined in statute. So we're following statute, and so that's where I think some of the conversations there is advocacy, like what is the statewide advocacy, or what do we need at this time? And certainly senior leadership and the superintendent and superintendents around the state are asking, and engaged in these conversations. And so I just do appreciate, because we are talking about funding, and I understand very clearly that all of us are really, the concern is students who are unenrolled and making sure our students are safe and cared for and taken care of and engaged. So I just think there's lots of that work that's happening, and I think those are great topics for us to have today and in the future, but specifically on this topic in the future. What we're going to do for what the next two topics are for today are actually to hear about from two of our school leaders, and if that's okay to shift to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just think that we're making all these shifts, and all these pivots are happening right now because of COVID, right? So this is just another COVID pit. It's a pivot. We're talking about how can we pivot in light of COVID, because if COVID wasn't here, we wouldn't be having the attendance issues and folks would be doing what they're doing. But now, in light of COVID, what's the pivot as it pertains to this? So we've talked about pivot everywhere else, and that's all. And I think that's all. Now that I'm hearing about this issue, I actually want to get more information on the issue. But to me, it's like, let's pivot. I'm simple. I'm a real simple dude, man. Like a 5th grade education, pivot and just go with it. But anyway, yeah, let's go on to charter schools.
Great. Thank you. So the next topic is really, I'm just going to hand it over really to our Tara O'Neill, our Director of Charter Schools, to just share about our charter schools. And then we have a charter leader coming up to give a presentation. And then Erica Davis, our Program Administrator of Contracted Alternative Schools, is going to introduce another school leader. And I just also want to say that we really appreciate these first two leaders from Portland Arthur Academy and from Portland Youth Builders. And for starting us off, both in charter presentations and in CBO presentations. They have not had as much time as people will in the future, and so other schools are signing up in the future. And so one of the things that's really important is that we get student voice. So I know in future presentations we'll also have some more time, and there's great presentations today, and we'll also be able to include more student voice in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tara.
Thank you, Karina. Good afternoon. I originally was going to give you a quick introduction into each of our charter school programs, but I think in the interest of time, what I would like to do is skip ahead to introduce the charter school leader who is here today from Portland Arthur Academy. And we have Stephanie Walker here today, the executive director over 6 Arthur Academies, one of which is in the Portland district. And the principal for Portland Arthur Academy, who's not here because she's subbing in a classroom, of course, is Tara Miller. And though she's not here, she's here in spirit and part of the presentation. Just a tiny bit about Portland Arthur Academy. They are located in Southeast Portland. Their student population is 25% historically underserved by race or ethnicity, 25% economically disadvantaged by direct certification, 9% emerging bilingual, and that is actually, I believe I saw that there are 12 evaluations at the start of this year additional, so that's likely going to go up to about 15 or 16% emerging bilingual, and 8% students with disabilities. So it's sort of the overview. And, oh golly, Karina, let's see, how do we go to our next slide? Do that, there you go. With that, I will pass this along to Stephanie, who's much more adept at this than I am.
Oh, not share, present. Press the wrong button there. Thank you, Tara, for that great introduction, and nice to meet you, Director Green. I haven't met you yet, but Director Lowry and Consan, nice to see you again. I've had the pleasure of these two coming out to our school in the past, so thank you. As Tara said, my name is Stephanie Walker, and I'm the Executive Director of the 6 Arthur Academy Charter Schools. This is my 17th year with Arthur Academy. Thank you. I'm getting old, so. And I've held 3 positions within the Arthur Academy Schools: teacher, principal, and now executive director. And again, Tara Miller, she's actually going into her, I think, 15th or 16th year with Arthur Academy. And I'm sorry she couldn't be here today, but like Tara said, she is subbing in kindergarten today. So like every school, if you're down one person, you know, everyone has to fill in. So. Okay, so our school, Portland Arthur Academy, is located actually in the Ascension Catholic Church. We share that space with the church, and then sort of the building right next to it, next to us is another church. And we have a good relationship with our community and our neighborhood, and we've been there since opening in 2005, 2006. 2005, thank you, Tara, I should know that. And and we've been there the whole time. We have parking lot PE, which is really fun. We don't have a gym, but we make it work. And we don't have a traditional playground either, but it's in the back. We make it all work. Like I said, we've been there since '05, and it's working out really well. So Arthur Academy, this is just who we are, our mission, motto, and core values. Basically what our mission says is no matter who you are, we want you to be a fluent reader and a successful, confident student who loves coming to school. So that's our mission, and our motto is really what our kids always say. It's the pay attention, work hard, get smart, and be proud. So kids will say, if we pay attention and work hard, we're going to get smart and be proud of ourselves. So it's a very student-friendly motto. And our core value statement, I think it's super important. I want to read that one to the group. Our school community is a place where students, staff, and families are valued and respected. We work together to provide a safe, welcoming environment in which all students thrive and love to learn. We came up with that, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago. We had a committee of all 6 of our Arthur Academies, teachers, admin, some student voices, and parents to come up with that core value statement. And we have done everything we can to embody that statement. And I think one of the important pieces there is, well, they're all important pieces, but we want everyone to feel safe and welcome. Otherwise, if students aren't feeling safe and welcome, they're not going to want to learn. So here's our staff. We have, we're a pretty small school. We generally have about 175 students. Right now we're at about 160. Everyone's down students, as we just heard earlier. And we almost are fully staffed. We still need one more resource coordinator, and that person, we have two availabilities, and that person helps with recess and lunch. And anyone who worked in a school knows how important those people are. And we only have one right now, so we're still down one person. So what's really interesting about Arthur Academy is we're a direct instruction charter school. So the next 2 slides talk about what makes direct instruction a unique model, instructional model. I'm not going to read every bullet point. There's quite a few of them here. But basically, they're general objectives in reading, math, language, spelling that are broken down into very small teaching progressions. So in kindergarten, we'll start with these very small progressions in reading, and we don't move on to the next lesson or to the next progression until all the students in that group have mastered it. And we consider mastery 90% or better. So on a test, on a skill, on a lesson, anything, you have to be at 90% or better to be able to move forward. And we really hope for 100%. And so those lessons follow a sequence. What is learned is continually used and applied. So basically 85 to 90% of what we do every day is review. The rest of it is brand new. And that really builds confidence in kids because they're really learning some complex material, but a lot of the times we hear students say, school is easy, this is fun and easy. And we want them to say that, even though they really are learning pretty complex material. And our lessons allow for active participation. Kids are always participating chorally, choral responses. If they're not doing independent work, they're with the group. And so we keep kids engaged and busy. So again, just a little bit more, it's more about that rapid pacing and choral response. So again, kids are engaged the entire lesson. Students progress from directed and guided activities to increasingly more independent work. So you'll see fifth graders do much more independent work than you would see our 5 and 6 year olds do. And the steps in DI and direct instruction have been developed from extensive field testing with hundreds of children over 30 years. So these programs really work, and we know they do. And we've been around 20 years doing them as well. These are our current demographics. Tara showed those as well. These are the most current ones, and I'd say over the last 5 or 6 years, Portland Arthur Academy's demographics have changed pretty dramatically to really mirror the neighborhood that we're in. And we've been pretty intentional about where we're, before we just sort of were there and people heard about us, right? And so we just got the kids who applied. We weren't super intentional about who we were reaching out to. We started to be more intentional about who to reach out to, where we would look at maybe Head Starts and churches, and we would talk to families about helping us reach out to their community. And so I'd say over the last 5 years, our demographics have shifted quite a bit. I'll get into a little bit about our ELL student information. This is just languages students speak at our school. We think this is pretty impressive considering we have a very small school, right? And this is just a little bit about what we do with our ELL students. We would do this with any student but that needs it. So our program, we use reading, math, and this is specifically for reading, what I'll talk about right now, but it correlates with our language, so ELA in general plus math. We do have whole group instruction, but in K1 we do a lot of small group instruction. So kinders, you could have anywhere. Well, today I was at Portland Arthur Academy this morning actually before I came here, and there's a group of 4 in one kindergarten group. There's a group of 10 in another and a 10 in the other, and it just depends on the needs of those students, right? And we'll do the same for math. We do that in K and 1. We'll do the same thing in 2nd through 5th if needed, but mostly we can do whole group with those kiddos. We do a lot of, specifically, we're very intentional about, okay, what does this particular student need? And if we're talking ELL kids, a lot of them need to see pictures of vocabulary, right? We get into pretty in-depth vocabulary words, especially in 4th and 5th grade. So it's a lot of review of what those vocabulary words mean and using them in real life, and like I said, pictures, and a lot of different ways of interacting with the lessons. So, all right. And this is pre-COVID, when we could all be really close to each other. And so what you would see in a DI classroom is a teacher really close to kids looking at their little mouths and making sure they're forming their sounds and their letters correctly and blending and segmenting correctly. And so those are 2 kinder groups, and you can see the teacher really up there, showing them, oh, this is how you say this sound. And then the other picture is a whole group reading, or that's 3rd grade. I think they're doing paired reading or paired rocket math in that one. So that's what pre-COVID, what a DI classroom would look like.
So can you Director Green, I hope you have a chance to go visit Arthur Academy. So I think I probably would not have understood exactly what direct instruction means before hearing it, but can you it's like call and response. It's all verbal, it's, broken. Can you just give a little bit of an example of that? Because it's not something that you typically see in a classroom. But the thing that's cool is like the kids are hyper engaged, and then their data shows it's also extremely effective in terms of literacy.
Yeah, so right here, we might in this one, you might hear the teacher say, okay, this sound is for the sound M. Okay, tell me that sound, get ready. And then everyone says the sound and then they get individual turns, and then that's really exciting. And then they get stickers and stars and points if they're correct with their individual turns. And of course they're going to be correct because we just taught them what that sound is, right? So that's part of this. Is really exciting. I get excited just doing this.
And you do like I remember when I took the tour, kids are seated based on like how they've where they are. So like kids who need a little more assistance are near the front, and kids who have more mastery are near the back. And that's constantly evaluated and changed as kids master things.
Yep.
Other kids are moved
Yep.
forward. So there's this, so the teacher is able to be right there, really direct with the kids who need the most support in
Yep.
that moment. And then other kids who have mastered it are towards the back of the classroom because they don't need as much direct, like the teacher doesn't need to watch their little mouths as closely when they've mastered
I am
the
so
sound.
impressed that you remember all this.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool.
And it's very fast paced too.
Yes, yes.
Like math facts, like out loud.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like in kindergarten, pretty much they all need to be close to us at all times, right? Even though COVID times they can't. But let's just say in third grade, typically you would see a lot of, when you think about a classroom, I'm not saying that teachers do this now, but when you think about a classroom and you've got your tricky kids or kids that cause some trouble, just get them out of here, put them in the back of the room, right? No way. We want them right up in the front of the room so they can be right front and center so we can correct their behavior over and over and in the most positive way as well, and catch them being good. We want to make sure that the second they do something that's correct, either behaviorally or academically, we catch it and we tell them that they're doing that really well.
And one of the things I appreciated when we did the tour of the school is that, is it Tara or Tara? Tara had said, you know, we sometimes get families that come here because they want to go to a different kind of school, and they're looking for like the Waldorf and the project-based and the, Waldorf, they knit recorder holders, right? So it's very different. And that Arthur Academy is not that. Right. And that if you're expecting something different, to be really clear what it is, and then it might not be for all families. Right. And I really appreciated that clarity of like, we are this, we know it works, you're welcome to be here, and we're not going to be knitting recorder holders, right? Like, and not that there's anything wrong with knitting recorder holders. That's awesome for kids who that's the right thing for. This directed instruction is the right thing for other kids. And I so appreciated that clarity and that, like, you know, because you don't want families that are there thinking they're going to get one experience and have this very different one.
And that's been a little tricky for these new incoming kinders, is to be that explicit, because normally we bring all those families in and we will show them what it looks like. We'll do some demonstrations and of course we can't do that right now. And so we still have to be upfront about it, of course.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about our charter schools and our CBOs and all the alternative things, is that we do have a range of, you know, if we that list you had up there earlier, Tara, had all these like different schools that have different missions and different ways to speaking to different kids, because thank God we're not all the same. Right.
Right. It's what works for particular kids or a particular group of kids. Yeah. I think there's just fun pictures now.
So I think what I'm hearing clearly, very clearly, is I got to go to this school. That's what I'm hearing very, very clearly.
It's a little hard to find. I drove around the church for a while, but it is there. It's like in the back parking lot behind the church.
You said church. I'll just walk into a church. So I got to go. Keep going.
Yep. No, that's it. And yeah. Thank you guys. Yeah. We're the dinos. And again, I really wish Tara Miller could have been here, and this would have been, like I said, she's been with us for 15 years or so, but this is only her second year as principal, so she's actually never been a principal in the real world, is what I tell her, which is, I think she's benefited from this, maybe, but she's never had to present in front of she's never been able to present in front of a board. And I really wanted her to do that today. And so, Director Green, you'll have to come to the school so you can meet her.
I think that's what I took from all this and all the amazingness. You got to come out to this school and experience it firsthand for yourself, because that's the only way you're truly going to appreciate the greatness of what's happening right there. That's what I heard.
Then you have to go to the Portland Village School to see the greatness they're doing in a totally different way. It's amazing.
And if you need to learn math facts, you come to you just be there with us. We got you.
I don't think I would get to leave, because I don't understand this math they got today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Stephanie.
The other thing you'll learn about Stephanie is there is not a bigger Blazer fan in the city of Portland or the state of Oregon. Okay, and then next we have Miss Erica. And again, I think we'll just. Yep. We also are going to skip the listing of the contracted alternative schools because I think we know who they all are, and if not, you can refer to this handy slide. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Zach as I kind of share a little bit about what our CBOs have been up to this year. Can I just say one thing, which is we are working with our CBOs to get a schedule for school visits. That's all I
Yes.
wanted to say.
Yes, we are.
Anytime. We did have our recent CBO Back to School Day where we called all our school leaders together to kind of convene for the beginning of the year. We meet regularly, but if we had more time, I'd share a little bit of what came up at that meeting. But this slide kind of works to highlight some of the big things that were being raised. And so once again, you can refer back to that if you have time. Without further ado, Zach Karasy from Portland Youth Builders. Can I get a round of applause, please? Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, this is my first time sitting in front of a board, so I'm excited to be here, and I wanted to thank the board and PPS and all the community members attending today for commitment and support to providing lots of different pathways to success for our students. I think everybody in this room knows that an equality model does not work well to support diverse students with diverse needs living in diverse realities. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about how I see us as a really unique part of the greater system in our city. And as was mentioned, I think student voice is the most important part of what we do. I can tell you an outline of how our program works, but I did upload a video because I couldn't get a student to come in with me in time, which is a student who is just getting ready to graduate this month, who is a PPS student, has been with us since pre-COVID times. Folks, I want to introduce Ronderick Moore to you. And am I seeing nods because you know Ronderick? That's awesome. Ronderick is an awesome young man and great journey through our program, taken a lot of different turns, and let's hear a little bit about what he says about our program.
Off? Or up? Oh, hold on. I don't know how it will. Should I do it from here? I just did this thing. Okay, hold on one second. There. All right, we're
He's
going
got
to try
that $1
again.
million smile there, right? Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Somebody's coming to help me. Thank you so much for your continued support. I will say in the meantime that PYB does serve students from various districts, PPS just being one of them. I think they're currently serving 6 different school
Six
districts.
districts in the Portland area.
And how many PPS students?
Currently, I believe we have about 5 PPS students that is with lower enrollment time right now.
Got it. I'm going to pause it in the meantime, and then he's going to say something, and I'm going to press play. Yeah, one of you.
Ronderick is kind. He's thoughtful. He's caring. He loves his family. He always puts his family first.
Okay,
And he's open to learning.
got it.
When Ronderick first came to our program,
Volume up.
he didn't know what we were about. He just thought we were a cool place to be. What he didn't understand was the rigor of our program.
You're going to see that smile one more time. Cue the smile.
Ronderick is kind. He's thoughtful. He's caring. He loves his family. He always puts his family first. And he's open to learning. When Ronderick first came to our program, he didn't know what we were about. He just thought we were a cool place to be. What he didn't understand was the rigor of our program. He didn't understand that attendance was a real big deal because he was used to public high school where he missed many, many days. And according to him, a lot of his teachers didn't even know that he was gone. His mom didn't know that he was gone.
Traditional schooling wasn't really working for me, but I guess with PYB, I decided to give it a chance. But there's always a part of me that just thought that I was just going to another school, getting treated poorly and just the same. But coming here and actually in the first day, it just surprised me. It just changed my whole attitude, my whole motivation for it and everything.
Ron Derrick, for whatever reason, at times it seemed like he couldn't catch a break, even though he was putting all his effort into what he was doing. There were moments where there was food instability. There was moments there were housing instability. There were moments that personal relationships went south and supports that he believed would be there forever were no longer there. All the while pushing himself to complete high school.
I remember Rana, with him being concerned and everything, wanting me to graduate and everything. He explained to my mom the plans and the issues. And he's just been actually engaging with my mom and my parents and just been trying to just make sure that I'm okay at school, make sure that I'm okay at home, make sure that the household's okay. Like, honestly, I've never experienced that from a different teacher or anybody. Nobody. It's just been at Portland Youth Builders, and it's just been crazy.
When we talk about support to our students know that when we're talking about support, we're talking about more than just them. We're talking about things that are going on in their life. We're talking about supporting, needs that they may have for their siblings, for their families, for their own children, to help support them. And I think that speaks to the culture that we have in this place. I want to say that our students know that we are here to support more than just them. We're here to support the people in their lives as well.
I'm currently at PYB, and I'm graduating in October. This is the greatest challenge I've ever had to go up against. Like, I don't even know how I'm doing it at this point. I also feel a new feeling, a new power has awakened in me. I think this power is motivation. PYB then finally gave me motivation. And the people around me then gave me motivation. And I finally sat back and I took it in. And here I am. And I thank Portland Youth Builders for that. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to see what he does. I'm excited when he calls me now. He calls me now. He's thrilled at the idea of finishing high school. He never thought he was going to do it. He engages students. He's vocal. He's excited about his future. He wasn't excited about his future before because he didn't think he had one. I'm happy that we helped him find it.
I came to PYB expecting a diploma and to learn about technology. But I'm about to leave with so much more. What I'm taking from this is just priceless. This is crazy. This is the most fun I've had in school in years. And it's sad that I'm 20 now and it's coming to an end, but they're here to just basically get our careers as fast as possible. They want us to thrive. They want us to actually be ourselves. And I can appreciate that the most.
Like 2 weeks from now. Yeah. So I've spent a little over 6 years as a teacher at PYB, and just recently I've stepped into the education director position. And so I've had the great pleasure of working directly with Ron Derrick and facilitating his diploma plan. A little bit about our program. While we are an alternative school, we consider ourselves a job readiness program that also supports students with high school completion. We serve students that are 17 to 24 years old, and about 50% of our students identify as students of color. About 20% of our students are parents. As Erica mentioned, we serve 6 districts around, and we have 5 entry points into our program. We operate year-round, other than 4 weeks in June, July that we take off. Students' pathway through our program is typically about 6 to 9 months, but that really depends on what a student's need is. Some students are able to come through and achieve the different benchmarks that we have in place quickly. Other students we're engaged with in direct programming for 15 months. And then there's versions of connection that continues long after students leave our program. We are committed to serving all of our students for 3 years after they leave our program, but frankly, as long as they answer the phone, we're going to keep offering them help with whatever step they have coming up next in their lives. When students enter our program, they choose to either go into the construction trades pathway or into technology, and as Ron Derrick mentioned, was in technology, and it showed some pictures of our construction work.
So to take you back to that 3 years that you continue to offer support, and yet you continue beyond that, that's not something that's counted in the ADMW, is it?
No.
So just putting that out there.
We are an accredited high school. All of our students do earn high school credit for their classes, but the majority of our students earn high school completion through the GED. Being that, again, we are a short-term program, it's really dependent on how many credits they have remaining for their graduation requirements. In academics, we're deeply influenced by the work of Dr. Cherokee Holly and culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. And we work really hard to create space for students to bring their stories into our school, where we're working to validate and affirm their lived experiences. So my work in the classroom, a lot of it was about connecting these new concepts to them, new to them concepts to their lived experience rather than potentially their like previous high school and educational experiences. On the job side, our students earn industry recognized certifications. On the construction side, students are earning their BOLI certificate, Bureau of Labor and Industry, which allows for either direct or preferred entry into many of the trades unions in Oregon. On technology side, students are working with 3D printing, students are coding, doing robotics, getting their hands in the work, and are earning CompTIA certificates and other certificates that help them move forward in the tech industries. All of our students, or for the majority of our students, are also AmeriCorps members, because on the job training side, all of the jobs that they go on are service to the community and to other organizations that provide service to the community. So when a student finishes our program, they're leaving, for the most part, with an AmeriCorps Education Award that they can apply to whatever they go into next.
I used to be an AmeriCorps director, so this is, how much is the Education Award these days? It was like $4,500 back in the day.
It has definitely fluctuated, and the measurements have really fluctuated over COVID times, so I'll have to get back to you on the exact dollar amount.
Curious.
I believe it's $1,600 is around there, give or take, for what students
I was an
leave.
AmeriCorps member in 2001, so it's probably changed a little bit in the last 20 years.
And so, we have AmeriCorps members that serve as volunteers on our staff, and so that if that's what you did, it's a little bit different than what the service that our students are doing. On the tech side, they're going into the elder community, and they're supporting with helping elders learn how to use their smartphones and how to navigate tablets and whatnot. Construction is committed to serving low-income housing, working with Habitat for Humanity out in the community, as well as other organizations. Currently, we are operating primarily in person with some hybrid options. It's really hard to learn how to use a jackhammer without holding an actual jackhammer. We absolutely operate on a model of very high levels of expectations. You heard Ron Derrick speak about it. You heard Rana speak about it. But we approach that with very high levels of support. So what does support look like at PYB? Every student serves on and is served by a case management team that consists of members of each of the student-facing departments within our organization. So there's a member from academics that's talking about high school completion and how they're showing up in class. There's a career services member that is supporting with how do we bridge what they're doing right now to what they do when they want to leave our program. Look, diploma, GED, high school completion, it matters, but it does not change your life. And that's what we're really working to do, is to help elevate our students out of poverty into living wage jobs. We have a job site trainer that's talking about how students are showing up on the job site. And Rana, our program directors in there as well, can offer mental health support and what we're working to connect people with outside of our program. We work in conjunction on case management with the student to remove barriers to success and connect students to concrete services outside of our organization when their needs exceed our capacity in-house. And as I mentioned, students are bugged by their career coaches for 3 years after they leave our program. I believe in what PYB does. I'm really excited to be able to share what we do. I think we are really unique within the network in Portland. And I look forward to a continued relationship and hopefully coming back sometime with Ron Derrick sitting next to me.
What did you teach? You said you taught for 3 years?
Well, I'm a trained social studies teacher. I've had the opportunity there to teach some math, teach some language arts over the years as well. So I've gotten to...
I was hoping you were teaching like welding or...
No, I
something.
come from the academic side, but I would love to get my hands on that. I definitely wish some of the folks that supported me through high school would have talked to me about what the trades are, because when I take on some carpentry projects and I look at my student loans, I enjoy the projects and I don't enjoy the payments. So.
Much.
Thank
Look
you.
forward
Thank
to
you so much
coming
for having me.
coming to visit.
Yeah,
I've never been.
come see our construction folks at work. Come see our tech
Yeah.
site.
This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, we gotta go. Let's go together, you guys.
Kara, sorry, I was ungraceful sitting. So next we have public comment. Do we have folks for public comment?
Yeah, we have Joe McFerrin is here. We have two people. We'll call Joe McFerrin first.
I'd like to ask if people are going to
you
come
wanna go
up to
first?
speak for public comment, that you
Sure.
come up to the table and make sure that you speak into the mic so that everyone in TV land can hear you. I know I can hear you, but TV land, they want to hear you too.
And it looks like Tom, is it DeHarding?
That sounds fine.
Okay. What would like to go first?
I've heard it a lot worse. So. All right. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Tom Desjardins, and I'm the Executive Director at Mount Scott Learning Center, one of the contracted community-based organizations known as CBOs that collectively enroll more than 1,000 PPS high school students each year. As Director Constam and others have publicly noted before, these PPS students, which are the students that are most at risk of not graduating, are the students that the student investment account was specifically intended to support. 4 months ago, the CBOs believed they were collectively receiving a student investment allocation of $2.35 million for this year. This well-deserved allocation was applauded by CBO leaders and district board members at various meetings since then. CBOs proceeded to build their school budgets for this year based on this much-needed revenue. However, PPS Finance Department leaders now claim that the $2.35 million allocated directly to the CBOs was all a misunderstanding, and that the amount should only be $700,000, a difference of $1.65 million. PPS Finance leaders say there was an internal double-click on that $2.35 million line item for the CBOs, which are known as the district's private alternative programs. That double click would have revealed that the $2.35 million amount was actually being dispersed among 7 PPS departments that do not have a direct connection to the CBOs. The explanation we've received is that this is how things have always been done with these types of budget allocations. If this is how things have always been done, can someone please explain why this was not how things were done last year for the student investment account allocations? The COVID impacted amount directly allocated to the CBOs last year was $280,000. In this student investment account allocation budget document, that amount is clearly shown right next to the $2.35 million listed for the CBOs for this year. There was not 7 other unrelated PPS departments that shared last year's allocation with the CBOs. Why would we be expected to believe that would happen this year? Unfortunately, this treatment once again sends the message that PPS students attending the CBOs are worth less than other PPS students. This is especially true when compared to the overall per-student funding for the district's own alternative high school, Alliance High School. This treatment is not fair, it's not equitable, and we respectfully request that it be corrected. Thank you.
That document that that you have, do you have copies of that? And can Roberto get one too? Or if he doesn't already have it? Thank you.
Joe McFerrin.
Tom, where is this document from?
It was from the preliminary budget document that was online.
Thank you. Sorry, Joe, thank you.
No problem. Good afternoon, Charter and Alternative Programs Committee. My name is Joe McFerrin, President and CEO of Portland OIC and Rosemary Anderson High School. I had prepared documents, but I think I'll just get right to the point. Echo everything that my colleague Tom has expressed. But first and foremost, I want to also acknowledge that the district has really worked hard over the last several years to be equitable. So I want to acknowledge that. It's a tough deal. I appreciate all that you do to make that happen. And I have confidence in the staff. So I want to say that, even though we're grappling with these tough issues. Rosemary Anderson High School has a serious problem that I'm hoping the district can help. So, and it's all centered around enrollment. So, to cut to the chase, based on many, many years of history and looking at data with respect to alternative school services, we are projected to have a $1 million shortfall this year. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The way that we're funded is broken. I think COVID has really brought that to light. So in years past, we've been able to work together, make it happen, fundraising, others, we made it happen. This year, I don't see it happening. So I'm faced with making some very tough decisions. And so this is what it'll look like. We'll end up reducing our staff by 20 to 30%. We will cap our enrollment at a level that we can keep everyone safe and have a safe adult staff to student ratio. And what that will mean for the district is that we probably won't be able to take any more students beyond the end of October. And it pains me to say that because for over 30 years, Rosemary Anderson and POIC we've been able to take kids where they are, respond to the need of the community. But unfortunately, given COVID, the gun violence, we just can't do it. And so I'm hoping that in the long term, that we come up with a way to fund charter schools and CBOs similar to how districts are funded, so we have time to adjust. That's long term.
You mean in terms of the actual funding mechanism when
Yes.
you get repaid? Yes.
For example,
Got it.
public schools, my understanding, will not be impacted today for low enrollment. Their funding is solid. I'm going to build PPS in the next few days, and we're going to come up $100,000 less than what we projected in our budget. And that budget is based on history. So every month, we're going to be behind the 8 ball, 100,000, 100,000, 100,000. So I don't know, I have to be responsible. I want to be here for another 52 years. I don't want to be like the schools, AYOS, YEI, the charter schools, LEAP, that are no longer here. So we want to be here. So I'm going to make those tough decisions. But I'm hoping that the district will do something creative during this COVID situation to help us keep our capacity up this year so we can have slots for those kids who so desperately need our services. So I'm confident that that the district will help. I'm optimistic. And thank you for giving me a few minutes to share.
Director Green, point of privilege. Can I ask a question in response to public testimony?
Please feel free to ask your question, Director Comstan.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'm smiling a lot under my mask. So can you tell me what latitude or what provisions you work under with regard to virtual learning? So some of your students that are not showing up, what options do they have to remain engaged academically without coming to your school buildings?
So I'll go back. When COVID hit and we needed to go to 100% or predominantly distance learning, it was easier because we could take our staff and our resource and move it in that direction. But now that you've got escalating gun violence, it's critical for a campus at Rosemary Anderson to be staffed up if we're going to be in person. So that limited our ability to continue to do distance learning in any significant way. So we're doing a little bit now, and we're working with the district. We're using Canvas, but we're going to have to ramp that up. But again, the students are still required to come to campus. They're not, because we're not a quote unquote accredited online program. But I think it's a part of the solution.
I want to speak to one piece that is not directly Joe's issue, but it is a state issue, right? It's an Oregon issue right now. We are currently at 68 homicides for Oregon. If we get 70, that is the highest that we've had, which was back in 1987 when we were at an epidemic with gangs and that sort of thing. So we are slated as of right now we're going to hit 70. It's not a question of are we, it's just a matter of when. I'm realistic, you know what I'm saying, not naive. The reason that I'm bringing this up, now in this conversation, again, that's why I say this isn't Joe's issue, but it's a byproduct. And as I'm writing down stuff, you know, he's going to have to reduce his staff by 20 to 30%, possibly. I'm not saying, but I heard when I wrote down, my question was, what does this mean for our students? He said, I'm possibly going to have to reduce my staff by 20, 30%. I'm going to cap enrollment. I'm not going to be able to take additional students beyond October. And I'm going to every month lose 100,000. And so I take that dialogue and conversation, that what I'm hearing, in context with some of the people that his school serves are people that if they don't have somewhere else to do, they got this gun violence issue out there where they're like, hey, come on over here. I can show you how to get a few extra dollars. Come over here. I can show you how to do a few extra things. Come over here. As where when they're in his program, they're not in that stuff. And so if we're going to limit it, and to me, like right now, it was a little thing when you brought it up, Amy, because I didn't really understand what you're talking about. Or like, okay, yeah, great, let's figure something out. Now I'm actually scared out my mind because I'm like, gun violence is real. People are being killed. They're being killed in our streets, and those kids, they're either in his school, they're at Tom's school, they're in the PYB, they're with Portland Youth Build. These are kids that I know I know these families, I know these communities, and this is alarming. This is extremely, extremely alarming to me. I don't want to try to downplay it. I don't want to try to sugarcoat. This is a big deal. Not that solving this $100,000 issue is going to make gun violence go away, but every little thing that we can do as a PPS school district to minimize what we're seeing in gun violence is going to help our city. It's going to help the Portland Police Bureau. It's going to help the DA's office. It's going to help our families, and it's going to save our kids. So this is, to me, this is something that we need. I don't know. I'm just alarmed. Maybe it's just me, just like being new to this whole thing, not really understanding how it goes. But I know these streets, And I know what's happening out there, and I know where we're at with gun violence, and the idea that he's going to turn people away. That's what I think of. That was the first thing, that I'm not taking that student. Well, if they can't go to this school and they're not going to that school and he's not taking them anymore, then where are they going to go?
Right. And I don't think it's just you. And I don't think it's just because you're new. I think that this is a serious issue. As you were talking, I looked up the shootings, and the latest I could find was from beginning of September, 856 shootings in 2021. So, I mean, homicides is one thing, but there's also injuries, other kinds of violence.
I've got a report that I could give to you guys if I thought, you know, saying you wanted to look at it, where I've calculated not just the shootings. We've got shootings, you've got injuries. I track all this stuff from PPB. I'm keeping up with it. So every time they make a report, or every time a news article makes a report, I put a tally up. And you've got the shootings, you've got shooting injuries, and then you've got homicides, and then you've got domestic violence, and then you got stabbings. And so the stabbings is like, it's a whole nother thing. The domestic violence we've had just recently. Y'all remember what was her name? Brianna. She got killed. That was domestic violence. We had the girl that was found at the park, saying that Quick's daughter. That was domestic violence. And so, and these are our kids. Like, they went to our schools. I can tell you, I can look at this one, and I can tell you that this one went to Grant. I can look at this one, and I can tell you that she went to Jefferson. She went to Benson. I can tell you these things because we know these kids. And so when we're not doing something to try to keep these kids engaged, then we're missing the mark. And so it's a big issue for me. And our alternative schools, we need to be doing everything. That's why I think I harp so much on fix the money, so that they can focus on serving the kids. It's not just because I want them to get money. I'm thinking about when those kids aren't in those schools, the next place for them that's welcoming them are the streets. And when they get caught up in these streets, we lose our kids. And I'm tired of going to these funeral services with kids that I know personally, and I know their mothers, and I know their fathers, and what answer do we give them? And so it bothers me. It just bothers me. And that's enough of that soapbox, because that's not why we're here. But you know what? I'm the chair, and I got a mic, and we got to listen. So,
but we are here for the kids.
Yeah,
we
and
are here for the kids.
If I could just say, too, I brought my community care team here for their own leadership and civic engagement, but I wanted them to witness how you're grappling over these issues. So when we talk about it as an organization, they understand, because those folks have lived experience, and those are the folks that are at the football games, the PPS football. Those are the folks that are out there trying to do their very best to make sure that events are free. Yeah.
And you brought a couple of students. I won't say names, but we have students in the building that have found a space where they can actually be productive and be fluent. So it was great to see those students, because again, I know them personally. That's why when they came in, we was, oh my God, because I know these kids. So it was good to see that, and it was good to see your outreach team, them here. I'm glad they got to be here. I would love to hear at some point from them around some of the things that they're seeing, and what they think, not just as a charter school, but because they go to all our schools. They go to every game. They go to every football game. They show up at basketball games. I've seen some of them at soccer games when my daughter was playing soccer, and nothing ever breaks out at a soccer game, but they show up at a soccer game anyway. So it's like, it's terrible, but they're all over the place. I've seen them at volleyball games. You know what I'm saying? I've seen them like at all types of different places. I've seen them hanging out in the mall, because a lot of our kids, they get out of school and then they go down to the malls, and stuff happens in the mall. I've seen those guys at the malls. I've seen them at the transit stations, because they hang out there. I've seen them all over the city. And so my hat goes off to you for making sure that you got your team in different places. But I think for us as a district, as a committee, as a board, as a team, we need to figure out how we can continue, I won't say start, but continue to be supportive of our alternative school partners so that they're all getting and they're all able to serve the kids that they serve best, both effective and efficiently.
And I know that it continues the right word because I know we did $8 million in violence prevention this summer. I think 500,000 went to POIC for some of this really important work. And I know the district's interested in continuing to partner with violence prevention and exactly with what the both of you are saying.
But that's exactly a point that I wanted to make, in the sense that with our big bureaucracies, for better, for worse, sometimes the left hand and the right hand aren't communicating well with one another, because for us at PPS, that was really an expression of our values, to be able to support a lot of the work that you're doing, which is your community outreach team, not just you, POIC, but all of our partners and all of our RASJ partners. And that was a big chunk of change. And that was a really, it was wonderful to have had the federal infusion of federal funds to really be able to make that big investment. But that's different than what you're talking about, which is just for your schools and just based on enrollment, which is different than the grants and work that you get as a partner for all of that other work. And when I say you, I don't just mean POIC. And so I know Karina was on a call today with the statewide alternative schools group, and I know that this issue is on their radar, but after this, I would like to follow up to see, okay, what can we do to accelerate this at the state level? Because it's not a PPS issue, although we can make ourselves very loud on the issue, and I think we absolutely should. It's a state issue, because that's where that reimbursement is coming from. It's coming through us, but that's where it's coming from. And so we need to point out the not only the inequity of the situation, but the danger, as Herman was saying, the real danger and the misalignment with like what we say our values are, because there are reasons why those kids aren't showing up, and yet, as you said, that's right where they need to be. That's right where we need them to be. So I appreciate you bringing this forward, and I appreciate staff recognizing the urgency of this. And we can talk later about how we get follow up, what we can do in terms of statewide advocacy on this issue. And I know you're looking at real time reimbursement. You're looking at month by month. So this is not a solve it in the long term.
Right, I'm curious if there's any, and I don't know that we can even answer the question here, but if there's any creativity around what we can do as a school district with what we have, creatively wise, versus what we need to be making sure that we contact our Lou Fredericks and our Janelle Bynums down at the Senate level to be talking about those things. So are there things that we can be doing in conjunction that are working hand in hand? Like as a school district, is there something that, I don't know, and I'm not saying that there is, and is there something that we can be doing? So I'm just careful for that, and thank you for pointing out that it's 3:00, and I've kept all y'all over than what you need
The
to.
idea of turning students away who are seeking to enroll doesn't work.
That's scary.
That doesn't work.
That's scary.
That just doesn't work.
Yeah,
So,
and I'll just say, if we can get the ESSER to happen quickly, the reimbursement, which we're appreciative of that, and we can get this SIA thing resolved quickly, that'll push the problem down,
Further
and
out.
then we can that'll give us more time to come up with a resolution. So those two things would be huge. Getting those just done would be very, very helpful.
I also would be interested in learning more about how we support our partners with virtual options. If you think that you have students who would want to take advantage of that, who don't want to, who don't feel safe or comfortable showing up at your school building every day, but who would still stay engaged if they had another good option.
Yeah. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. If there be no more public comment, is there anything else that I need to do in this meeting? All right. Thank you all for coming. Y'all have a great day. Meeting adjourned.